what I just mentioned there is Pat 40 and some public sentiment, even from national media, really starting to flip. Everyone has really rightfully right now turned on the Big Ten and the SEC. I think you are absolutely seeing that in the way the college football public at large, i.e. college football fans, are reacting, the way that college football media is reacting, certainly, and even Congress, right? We have congressional, perhaps presidential pushback on some of what is happening right now. The only problem with all that is it may be too late. It may be too late. So let me explain here. The SEC, as I said, has done just a ton of whining, man. A ton of whining in light of their spring meetings and just having a microphone in front of them. I mentioned Kalen DeBoer. Here's Kalen DeBoer on being left out of last year's college football playoff. Quote, "You wonder what would have happened if other people would have played our schedule." Okay, well, this is where I will once again remind you all that Houston played at Oklahoma. Houston finished 11th in the Big 12. Houston lost by 4, 16-12 at Oklahoma. Alabama played at Oklahoma. Kalen DeBoer is complaining about his schedule. Alabama played at Oklahoma. They lost 24-3. They lost by 21 in Norman. Okay, so let's just chill on that a little bit. All right, if the 11th place team in the Big 12, who was a little frisky, but generally an afterthought this year, can handle Oklahoma that much better than you and Norman, maybe you should back off that comment a little bit, particularly when you just took over Nick Saban's program. Literally the best program we've basically ever seen in college football. Here's a Greg Sankey quote. SEC's Greg Sankey said, in the current college football playoff format, quote, "It's clear that not losing is more important than playing quality opponents." Well, again, this is an asinine statement because did you watch the 2023 college football playoff selection show when unbeaten Florida State was left out for an Alabama team with a loss? And it was because of strength of schedule. Yes, I know you're going to say, well, there was an injury too, John. Okay, whatever. If that were an unbeaten SEC team that had a quarterback injury, they would have gotten in because the SEC does get the respect for its strength of schedule. It was just for 1 year they didn't get an aggressively over-the-top amount of respect. It was an appropriate amount of respect for what the conference was last year. Here's Greg Sankey, quote, "I don't lecture others about the good of the game and coordinating press releases about the good of the game, okay? You can issue your press statement, but I'm actually looking for ideas to move us forward." Okay, Sankey. Okay, buddy. Meanwhile, the Big 12 and ACC do make a couple of moves in the interest of the good of the game, by the way, within the past week. You do not care about the good of the game, Greg Sankey. That much is very true. And everybody is on to you now. Everybody is on to you. And it's particularly infuriating to hear Sankey whine about this. Like he thinks nobody should be upset about the things that he is doing for the sport. Like, dude, just embrace it. You are the Darth Vader of the sport. Understand that. You're going to have to take that. You're going to take criticism from people. That's the deal, man. That's the deal. Here's even LSU Athletic Director Scott Woodward. "I do have grave concerns about where this is going and what's going to happen, even within our conference and even within the Power Four. Where and how does this thing evolutionize?" Nice word. "And what do we turn into?" It doesn't really seem like many people in your conference, including yourself, Scott, really have that much concern because of the way that you are acting. All right. That one made me laugh a little bit more so than pointing out it's whining. But there's a lot of whining coming out of the SEC. And it seems like the national media has finally wised up to this. I'm happy they have. Ari Wasserman has been taking the SEC to task ever since it was, like December and we were debating playoff bids. He continues to go down that road. Pat 40 wrote not one, but 2 columns for Sports Illustrated this week about Greg Sankey, how ridiculous it is that he seems like offended that people would criticize anything he's doing. He tore down their playoff proposal and how stupid it is. And then we had this from Stuart Mandel. Now, I know that Stuart Mandel is a polarizing figure around here, not a particularly well-liked guy. But look at this. We all have to admit, this is a good tweet from Stuart Mandel. Okay? Stuart says, "Fearing an Indiana-Oklahoma City finals, the NBA is considering a plan where the Lakers and Celtics would get twice as many entries in the playoffs going forward and a double bye. and twice as much of the postseason revenue. That is well played, Mr. Mandel, because that is a pretty perfect analogy. A pretty perfect analogy to what is going on. Fearing that you could get some other kind of team. We've got to set up our conferences to get double the amount of entries, more of the postseason revenue, and the buys. It's a good tweet, Stuart Mandel. I love it. Public sentiment clearly is shifting on this. Public sentiment is absolutely shifting. And, well, I love that. I'm not going to turn it away. I'm happy that these national sports writers are on board. I'm happy that the college football public at large seems to be on board with like, oh boy, we really are squeezing toothpaste out of the tube we can't put back in. And this is going to, maybe really ruin or adversely affect this sport that we know and love so much. Happy to have you here, guys. It's great. One problem, one frustration. You might be too late. Where was this in July of 2021? Where was this in July of 2021? You could have started the pushback when the greed of the SEC and Big Ten began, when the SEC took Texas and Oklahoma from the Big 12. At that time, in the national media, it was, at worst, cheerleading, grave dancing on the rest of the Big 12, like applauding this move, being excited by this move. Wow, this is going to make the SEC such a beast. This will be great. And at best, you had people that were just largely indifferent about this, not really that concerned about the Big 12. It's what spawned the Hateful Eight. Nobody gave a you-know-what about us. That's really why this channel started and became in earnest what it is, because nobody cared. Nobody cared. And when that stuff happened, it was very easy to see, like, guys, this is where it's going. This is the end game. We live in a capitalist country. We see how capitalism works and what happens, and you can extrapolate it out to where it's going to go if there are no regulations, which that's a whole other conversation. NCAA, college sports, not much in the way of good regulatory bodies that kept any of that stuff in check. So this is where it was going to go. And had there been pushback on this when that happened, or maybe even when USC and UCLA were poached from the Big Ten, or the Pac-12 rather, by the Big Ten, if there would have been more outrage and uproar at that point, maybe we could have stopped this sooner, because we're seeing this have a legitimate, as I've covered in the show, we're seeing this have a legitimate impact. The SEC now seems to be like, maybe we do need to really consider this 5+11 plan. Even though we have all the power, we could really do this if we wanted to. The pressure is working. It is having an impact. If this pressure could have started 4 years ago and we had that kind of head start, what could have been cut off at the pass? What could have been cut off from where we are actually now? Things could have changed. We could be living in a much different world, but the Stuart Mandels of the world were instead using their energy to write stories about how awful the TV contract was going to be for the Hateful Eight, the 8 teams left around, that they were going to have a TV deal worse than the AAC. Heather Dinich was busy throwing out tweets and stories with quotes from sources saying like, oh man, like the AAC could actually just take in the rest of these schools from the Big 12. Like the AAC would be the ones taking in those schools instead of the Big 12 taking in AAC schools. Like that's what people were spending their energy on at that point, instead of being like, hey, this isn't good and this is going to lead to a lot of bad things for our sport that were entirely predictable. And along the way, we've done things like, oh, I don't know, break up and destroy a conference that had been around for 100+ years. One of the most history-rich conferences in college football in the Pac-12. Guys, this could have been prevented had you have gotten on board sooner. But instead, at the time, it was like, and look, I try to be very, people will say, oh, you did it for clicks or whatever. Like, I get it. I'm in the game of like, if you're producing content, whether it's written, video, audio, whatever, you're producing content, you want to produce stuff that people will watch. And you're paying attention to what does get more traction. It affects us all to some degree. But if you really now are realizing that like, man, this is a horrible thing and could actually threaten what I do eventually at some point if there's less and less interest in this thing, that was entirely predictable, and you could have changed your attitude on that earlier to have a more long-term view of this and smoothed some of this out. But instead, here we are now. I'm not going to turn them away. I'm happy that there are people here doing all of this now. I'm okay with it. Please continue. Stuart, more snarky tweets about the SEC and the Big Ten. That's great. It all does help. I won't turn that away. But that doesn't mean that I'm not still a little tweaked by this. Maybe I have forgiven you in some ways, but I have not forgotten about what happened back then, because that's how we got to where we are at right now. One last note on this. I mentioned that there is congressional pressure being put on again, and that's because we got another tweet from Congressman Brendan Boyle, who says, switch this for you, who says, let me state this as clearly as I can. The Big Ten and SEC should be very, very careful about some of the decisions they're about to make, because they appear hell-bent on ruining major college football. I think they need congressional hearings into their collusion. Collusion. I like that word, man. Put that up with the tortious interference claims from Bob Bowlesby, right? Tortious interference, collusion. Got some congressional pressure there. We've got Cody Campbell in a position of power on this presidential committee. If it ever gets off the ground and really happens, it's been confirmed now the SEC and the Big Ten are worried about that. We've had reporting through CBS and Yahoo about that being a real legitimate thing here. When I say the tide is beginning to turn, there has been a real impact. There's been a real impact over the last month, where instead of it just being the SEC and Big Ten steamrolling their way to everything they wanted, there's at least a legitimate amount of resistance now. And a lot of things like attitudes are changing. So I have some optimism. I'm not gonna be naive enough to tell you, hey, everything is great, everything's fine, everything's fixed, it's gonna turn around. No, I'm not that naive. I understand the realities of the situation, but I am saying now's the time to keep that pressure turned up, because others are starting to, and it really is having an impact. It really is. So let's keep it going.